everybody wants to get united. Like, what we gotta do is meet everybody on 149th Street at the bench.
We're gonna be talking about the different levels and stages that you're gonna be going through as a graffiti artist, and what you can expect at each one of those levels. Now, I have to let you guys know right from the start, graffiti has a very low standard for skill and knowledge, so for that reason, our levels here are actually going to be twofold. As I take you guys through the different levels of graffiti, I will then, once we're done with that, talk about where you'll land as an artist in general, and the different levels of that. That way you can take your graffiti to a much higher level, and you can really see what you're capable of without having to limit yourself, or without getting to a certain point and thinking that that's all there is to get to, because there's a lot more, let me promise you that. So let's hop right into this with level 0, I guess. At level 0, you'll find two different kinds of people. Either people who've had an interest and have never actually begun to do it yet, or people who've been doing it for like a solid year, maybe 2 years even. And the reason we have that kind of buffer is usually in graffiti, those first few years are somebody kind of testing things out. Somebody seeing if they even like the art form. Normally they like the community, or they like the culture, or they like the act, but they're not really sure if they even like the art form just yet. So in these early stages when you're just getting into graffiti, you're oftentimes not just getting into the art form, but you're getting into trouble as well, you know? So oftentimes here we see more a focus on the community aspect of graffiti. Getting up, learning things about, you know, how graffiti is done, learning about crews and other graffiti artists and how crews work and how beefs work and things of that nature, rather than learning about the actual art form itself. It's here where we see people like very erratically throw together a hand style. At this point they typically don't have a throwy, just because throwies take a little bit more to get into, it takes a little bit more time to develop one, and they simply haven't spent enough time in graffiti to really develop much of a throwy. Some people do, but it's not as common. And we're also seeing very expressive pieces, we'll say. Pieces that don't make much sense, but you can see some ideas generating in there. It's also here, because people aren't familiar with graffiti, they'll almost always bite other people. They'll copy other people that they admire. So any cohesiveness in their work isn't really a credit to them, it's more a credit to who they're biting. As a result of that, we'll also see wildly different styles from these artists. You'll see them do one hand style, one piece, and then a totally different hand style with a totally different piece. And understand that having that capability to do two totally different styles takes years of practice. And this is just not going to be something that anybody who isn't very advanced is going to be capable of doing unless they're biting. But you know what? Weirdly enough, it's in this phase where I'd recommend go at it. I wouldn't recommend they do anything differently. Why? Because it's also here where we're seeing the person discover if they actually like graffiti to begin with. They're not dedicated just yet. They're not really invested in this art form, and the art form isn't invested in them. So explore to your heart's content and explore however you want to. It's here where I say have at it. Do your thing however you want. In fact, I wouldn't even recommend, unless you've decided that you want to move up to stage 1, I wouldn't even recommend watching my channel at this point. Now, once you decide that you actually enjoy the art form, that's when we get to stage 1. Stage 1, we still see people biting quite a bit. In fact, that's going to be something we see throughout every stage of graffiti, unfortunately, because copying is rampant in this art form. Despite how much people, you know, claim otherwise, almost every single graffiti artist in existence does not truly have a style of their own, and instead just copies as much as humanly possible, and they simply become better and better at hiding that. But we'll actually get to that towards the end of the video once we get past graffiti's levels. So at level 1, you're going to start to see somebody generate some consistency with their hand styles. Now, this consistency is going to weirdly still be inconsistent. Let me explain why. Because their fundamentals aren't solidified, because they still don't have an understanding of how graffiti functions, they're not capable of consistently landing a letter structure. They're not capable of consistently landing their shapes. They're not capable of consistently clean lines. But they know what they want their letters to look like. They've designed a hand style at this point. They've designed a throwy, potentially, at this point. And they know what that design is. So every attempt you'll see is a consistent attempt at a particular design. But the lines, the shapes, and the letter structures that make up that design are inconsistently done. The same is true for the throwy. But the pieces is where we begin to see a big differentiation. A lot of times we see wildly, vastly different types of pieces. You'll see them do one type of piece and it'll look slightly refined because they're able to sit there and, you know, erase and make sure things are right, as opposed to the fast action hand style or throwy where there's no going back. So things might look a little bit more refined, but those inconsistencies are still there. And because they're changing styles so much, this is the artist kind of exploring where they would like to take their graffiti graffiti, while also attempting to look more advanced. The reason I make that point is because graffiti is very ego-driven, it's very reputation-based, and a lot of people want to put their best foot forward. So they want to present as if they're better than what they might actually be, and that's how they do that. At this point, they'll still have inconsistent 3D, they'll have inconsistent drop shadow, they won't really be able to do any kind of serious lighting or accurate lighting, and even if they are capable of doing drop shadow or 3D, they certainly won't have an in-depth understanding of those topics just yet. Now the question becomes, how do we fix this? How do we move on from that point? And what are we looking to learn from that point? Well, the answer is to gain a better understanding for your general art fundamentals. Now this doesn't mean that you have to become a portrait artist or a landscape artist or a still life artist or anything of that nature, but rather understand and study lines, shape, form, value. Study those topics, understand how they function, learn what they entail and how they work. That way you'll have more information to actually illustrate those things. And it'll also help you with your letter structures, because guess what? Our letters, whether you're doing a hand style throw or piece, are made up with lines and shapes. And at level 2, that's what we begin to see. We begin to see an intermediate graffiti artist where now they have a consistent hand style, and it might even look pretty good. They have a throwy, or at least they certainly should by this point, and a throwy should look somewhat decent. Normally throwies take people the longest to learn, so they take a bit more time to catch up. But we're also starting to see more refined and honed in pieces. At this point, they begin to have an idea of where they want to take their style with pieces. They begin to think and conceptualize of how they want to change their letters and what their preferences are for letters. Unfortunately though, it's also here where we start to see them develop a lot of practice bad habits. Because graffiti does not really have a high standard of skill or knowledge, they rely a lot on intuition for how they believe things should look. And unfortunately, a lot of what comes with that intuition is misunderstandings and practice bad habits. This is a trap that you certainly don't want to fall into. Their pieces will begin to have, or at least should have, proper 3D and drop shadow. They might even have really expressive fill-ins and really dope fill-ins. They're doing crazy stuff in regards to that. But maybe their letter structures are still lacking. Their extensions may not make sense. Their extensions don't really help in the overall image, even though the idea behind the extension might have been a good idea. They just don't know how to implement those ideas just yet. And this extends to pretty much all forms of graffiti as well, where even in their hand style, they're doing certain things that are good ideas, just the execution wasn't quite there just yet. And by practicing your basic fundamentals like letter structure, negative space management, letter name weight, letter name positioning, and flow, topics that you'll learn all about in our book right here. And we have a playlist dedicated to it right here. And it's the only book on the market that does that. No other book will teach you that information the way that this one does. You can find the book in the description down below. We have digital copies over on our online store, theartistblock.inc, with physical copies over on Amazon. That thing will take all of the confusion and all of the guesswork out of graffiti, and it'll give you a solid foundation you need to build the style that you envision in your head. You know, when you're drawing and you struggle to get that image out of your head onto the paper, that book will teach you how to fluidly get those ideas out there by giving you the foundation you need. And once you've learned those fundamentals, then you can progress to the next level, level 3. It's here where we get to the pro tier graffiti artists, the people who can bang out hand styles, throwies, and pieces, and it looks magnificent. They're doing some crazy stuff, and when I say crazy, I don't necessarily mean that it's wild style or anything of that nature, but things are refined. Their shapes, their lines are all crisp and clean. While some graffiti artists choose to specialize in just their name, there's nothing wrong with that. The art form is very much for yourself after all, so you know, no judgment there. But you'll also have graffiti artists that are beginning to master other people's names. They're able to just do a name with very limited amounts of practice. And this is because they're relying on how they understand the actual letters themselves, the alphabet, the structures, and the other fundamentals. This general knowledge of not only general fundamentals, but also graffiti's fundamentals allows them to be very adaptable to just about any name that they're given. Unfortunately, a lot of this knowledge is also still intuition. As previously mentioned, most graffiti artists only have an intuition for the fundamentals, and they don't ever really bother to study the fundamentals. This is partially because the information for the fundamentals wasn't really put out there until very recently. So as a result of that, you'll get people that are capable of doing very advanced graffiti, and they very much have a professional skill level, but they have an amateur knowledge level. They have zero actual understanding of graffiti's fundamentals, but because graffiti has and I don't mean this as an insult, I swear, because graffiti has a low standard of skill and knowledge, that lack of knowledge isn't really much of a detriment to their skill. Granted, because of that lack of knowledge, it'll take them decades to reach that skill, but at the end of the day, they were still able to reach that skill. However, it's also here where the progression stops. It's also here where, because of that lack of knowledge that most graffiti artists have, they pretty much won't make any more progress from this point. This is where you see a lot of graffiti artists begin to do the same pieces over and over again. Or you'll see the exact opposite. You'll see a graffiti artist get many different styles of pieces, hand styles, and throwies, and they won't be able to explain any of the fundamentals behind it. They won't be able to explain the fundamentals behind their own style, and oftentimes they really don't have any control over their own style because this entire time, to this point, they've been copying and becoming better and better at copying people and disguising it, taking a little bit here, a little bit there, and meshing it into one big glob that they call their style, but they've never bothered to stop, study, and understand what that is. And as a result, because of the lack of understanding, they have no control of that style. And without control, you can't grow and progress that style. But at least their work looks dope, and that's what we call professional level graffiti artists in graffiti. Now, if you want to get past this and move to the next level beyond professional graffiti artists, this is where things get fun. This is where your stuff really begins to explode and reach a whole new level, especially in graffiti where we have so much to work with and it's such a stylistic art form. This is where things really get exciting. So to break out of this, the first thing you want to do is, if you've been copying, you're going to stop that immediately. For a lot of professional graffiti artists, that's going to mean that you're going to lose out on a lot of your styles, a lot of the things that you perceived to be your styles. This is a very bitter pill to swallow for a lot of people, and it sucks, because with this comes the realization that once we break out of that and we move past that professional level to a higher tier, we realize that we're only intermediate at best in just general art. We're not any more knowledgeable or any more skilled than the average middle schooler art student or the average high schooler art student that's taking art seriously. We have less knowledge than the average art student about the general art fundamentals, and as a result our own fundamentals. While we have lots of intuition to go off, most of that intuition is backed by misinformation and practiced bad habits. So now we have to actively unlearn a lot of that, and the way we do that is by studying the actual fundamentals. Line, shape, form, value, space, color, texture, letter structure, negative space management, letter name weight, letter name positioning, and flow. Luckily, if you've been doing this from your early days in graffiti, you won't have to go through this difficult process later on. If you're like I was, where you were late on this information, then you gotta go through this process and it sucks. But with this new information comes a higher refinement of your work and an exploration of your work and your styles with more clarity. And as a result of both of those things, you'll also be able to illustrate your concepts and your ideas for style with more clarity, which is going to help you lead to more progress. But this all hinges on you practicing and learning those fundamentals while keeping it simple. Once you do that, you can move to level 3, Advanced General Artist. At this point, we understand line, shape, form, value, space, color, texture. We may not necessarily be able to illustrate all of it, we're still working on refining it, but we understand the information. We understand the curriculum there. With this newfound information, you begin to learn graffiti's fundamentals again for the second time very rapidly. But now your knowledge for this and your understanding for that same information is much deeper. Suddenly, letter structures aren't just letter structures, but rather you're learning the fundamental relationship between letter structures and all of the other fundamentals. And then you're doing that same process for every combination of fundamentals. And having that kind of general knowledge of everything really helps out. And once we've done that, we finally hit the pro general artist level. This is the standard for just about every other art field. This is where you'll get people who have a very deep knowledge of general art fundamentals. So we're talking line, shape, form, value, space, color, texture. But they also have a very deep knowledge of their own art form's fundamentals. For graffiti, that'll be letter structure, negative space management, letter name weight, letter name positioning, and flow, which once again we teach in the book, and we have a playlist dedicated to it right here. It's at this point where we once again have that understanding of the curriculum, the information, but we also now have the skill and the dexterity to back it up with our illustrations. Now we should have a very refined hand style, a very refined throwy, and a very refined style for pieces. We should also have the ability to do anybody's name in graffiti with minimal practice. Now that isn't to say that you're gonna land it on the very first attempt every single time. No artist ever does, right? A concept artist doesn't land a concept on their first attempt, right? It's the same thing here. Somebody can give you a brand new name, you'll make an attempt at it, it might be good, it might not, but with very limited practice, you'll be able to do a really good hand style for it, and a really good throw-in piece for it. Graffiti's fundamentals don't really become a challenge at this point. At this point, you've kind of breached past that, and now it's more a matter of, instead of trying to reach certain echelons within graffiti, now you're taking graffiti and you're pushing the whole art form to these new echelons. It's at this point we begin seeing people like Mad C, we begin seeing people like Dame, or a Dime, I think is how it's actually pronounced, my apologies, but you begin seeing these really high tier graffiti artists that have have been at this pro general art level for decades now. You should also be more than capable of shading your graffiti. You should be capable of doing advanced 3D on your graffiti, whether that's 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective, 4-point perspective, 5-point perspective. You should be capable of doing cast shadows and understanding cast shadows versus drop shadows. You should also be able to understand other people's style at a glance. It should not take much effort visually to look at somebody's piece, hand style or throwy, and immediately be able to understand how their style functions. Now, this information isn't used to then copy them. At this point, you don't need the use for copying, but it is used to understand different areas of graffiti that you may not have explored. It's also here where we begin to see a lot of graffiti artists begin to kind of branch off into new areas of art. They've, through their studies, learned of other avenues that they might want to explore. And while sure, these new avenues may not be for everybody stylistically, so your favorite graffiti artist may take on a new avenue that you're not really too interested in, but it's here, once again, that we begin to see people explore these other areas of art in a more deep way. In a way where they're allowed to kind of dig into more information that graffiti just simply doesn't offer. It's also here where now the potential is limitless. Now, reaching this professional level in the general art space normally takes an artist, a normal artist, anywhere from 3 to 5 years of consistent fundamental practice. Graffiti artists at this point, because they took the path of graffiti first and they didn't put as much of an emphasis on the fundamentals in the beginning, they normally take a good few decades to reach this point, and that's if they're lucky. Most graffiti artists will not get close to this level. And this isn't meant to belittle or to dishearten anybody. Any of you guys watching this video, now that you've seen this video, you guys can certainly reach this point. There is no doubt in my mind that you would be able to do that. But for those taking the journey of graffiti without watching this video, without knowing what else is out there, what they're capable of, well, their journey stops at becoming a professional graffiti artist. Their journey takes them much longer because they don't know the things to practice. They don't know how to practice. And there you have it. Those are the different levels to graffiti. If you guys want to move through these art levels and you want your graffiti to reach that professional level that we just talked about, then check out our book in the description down below. And in addition, because reaching that level does require general art information, study those elements of art: line, shape, form, value, space, color, texture. But with that said, if you want to check out the book, we have digital copies on our online store, theartistblock.inc, in the description down below, and we have physical copies over on Amazon. We got links in the description down below. Now, if you want to check out the best how to do graffiti tutorials anywhere online, we got them right up here for you to help you move through those art levels, and more graffiti content right down here. And I'll catch you guys back here next week. Thanks for watching.